Chris, I want to talk to you about a one lyric in particular. I think it was the second verse. Winters come to take me away. I wear my ring to know what's at stake. And when the days work at their own pace, you'll remain my time and place. When I think about Dashboard Confessional, when I think about your music, I think about how incredibly personal it is. But one thing I don't necessarily think we talk about enough is what are the stakes that one takes on when one writes about somebody else, when one writes about a real person.
Yeah, you run the risk of losing that person, I think. You're putting yourself on display, and you're putting someone else's experience on display. In most cases, I would say in every case, with permission. I've been pretty cognizant that it's important to make sure the person I've written about knows why I've written about it. And some of those earlier songs that were maybe not, that were a little, I don't know, born out of a little bit of pain. They understood why I needed to write it, and to their credit, were supportive of it, and I continue to be.
Is there ever a point where you feel you look back that you may have shared a bit too much about somebody?
No, I think I've kept things. Well, yes, I think there's things I've shared about myself that I don't know that I certainly don't regret sharing it, but I have to live with having shared it.
Yeah.
But the things I've put on display about other people, good or bad, I would say that they're snapshots of smaller moments and of a larger relationship, and they're veiled in enough secrecy that I've kept the people I've written about pretty private, except for me.
It's a funny thing when it comes to you, because I think about you in the same way I think about comedians in a funny way, because I think the one thing we value in your music is the same thing we value in a lot of modern comedians, which is this idea of being as confessional as possible. We want confession. We want to go as intimate as we possibly can. And I find that so interesting, if you don't mind me saying, about the idea that you also you understand that people want that from you, and you understand that you want to give that, and you understand you want that to be part of your art. But there are stakes there, aren't there?
There are stakes, and I wanted to do it. So irrespective of what other people wanted, before anybody was listening, I felt like I just needed to write to write it in this fashion, without really understanding why I needed to, or what may come from it.
Yeah.
So, like in many things, you stumble into what works best for you as a writer.
When you say best for you as a writer, how do you mean?
Well,
what gives you the best art that you can make, or?
I think that I've been successful in mixing real life and metaphor, and letting it appear to be as thinly veiled as possible. Sometimes it isn't as thinly veiled as it seems, and sometimes it's more so.
Yeah.
But when you ask what's at stake, there's a lot at stake, not just in the subject matter I've decided to sing about. The fact that this job requires me to leave the person I love for very long periods of time is an unusual facet of a relationship that is unusual in and of itself, and can be a strain on the relationship. And I'm grateful that my wife is incredibly independent, and she's not living a life that's defined by what I'm doing with my life.
Yeah. But and I'll say this, and I know this from personal experience, as strong as your relationship can be, and it can be the strongest relationship in the entire world, you put 2 months of distance, you can have all the FaceTime in the world.
Yeah.
You can have all this Skype in the world. You're going to feel that distance, and I find you feel it the most when you come home.
Yeah.
It's those first 2 or 3 days.
Well, that's where we got the record title from. There's a song called Crooked Shadows, and I had just come home the day before from a pretty lengthy tour overseas. And there is those first couple of days where, I mean, in the movies, it's glorious, the reunion.
The arms are outstretched
Yeah.
and the big hug.
And certainly you get that when you walk in the door. But then you have to figure out how you fit into each other's lives again. So we were out walking in our little downtown area in the city we live in, and it was cloudy, and we were walking hand in hand, and we were together, but we were still not together. And the sun broke through for a minute, and I saw our shadows cast up a staircase, and it was crooked. This cascading up the stairs, this crooked shadow of us holding hands, and I thought, well, I've said this before, but what I thought was, that's not perfect, but it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And
it's us.
And that's us.
That's us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're right, it does. You do have to figure out how do we operate again in this. We just got used to operating separately and being happy.
Yeah.
And fulfilling to each other. Now we're together. Now how do we? You'd think that's a gimme. It's not.
And we're going to figure this out for a certain amount of time, and then I'm going to go again.
Yeah.
And then
just when we get the hang of it, I'm going to be gone. Sorry.
And there's no learning curve. When you come back, it's the same thing again. I know people who when their partners come home off the road, they make a point of just being there for the hug, and then they leave for the entire day. So that person can become more acclimatized to being back in the house and used to everything.
We haven't really tried that. I don't know.
I never tried it either, but it sounds like it could work.
I mean, there's probably a million things to try, but I think it's going to be the same work. They're just workarounds, really, for the same issue at hand, and that is, if you're going to be in the constructs of your relationship are unconventional, you're going to have to deal with it at certain points. Yeah.
What I find so interesting about you is when I introduce you there, I say, here's Dashboard Confessional with so and so song, and it's you. And I'm not interested in getting into the personnel aspect of Dashboard Confessional. What I'm interested in is sort of like the nomenclature / spirit of each project. Because when I look at like other bands, you have Twin Forks and you have Further Seems Forever, yet it seems like you know exactly when you begin and when Dashboard begins, where you end and Dashboard begins.
I think I do.
What is it?
It's hard to define. The me that's in the songs it is certainly part of me. I don't know if it's the largest aspect of who I am as a person.
The person in the songs is not all of you.
No.
No.
The person in the songs is probably who I am at my best and who I am at my worst. And most of us spend most of our time somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
As do I.
So when you write a song, do you know immediately this is a Dashboard song?
I do. I do know. And I wouldn't know how to tell you what the clues are that indicate this is a Dashboard song.
Can you tell me when? Do you know it's in the first strumming of the chords, the first few words, or do you know when it's completed?
Far before it's completed. Sometimes in the first strumming of the chords, but often sometimes you write a bunch of lines before you get to the first line that you're going to keep, and if that usually tells me which band it's for. And Dashboard's the only one where, if I have one of those, where I say that line could only be for Dashboard. In other words, if I don't get that moment, I could write for anything. It could be Twin Forks or Further, or the songs I write for other people, or some other project I may do down the line.
But there's this one line you'll say right there.
Yeah,
that's Dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen a change in your writings in the years off, in the years since you've been Dashboard?
I'm sure the evolution is more evident to other people than it is to me.
But do you notice anything at all?
Well, I think I'm maybe only slightly more eloquent. Well, what I like about everybody has things they don't like about their own writing, and they do like about their own writing. What I like about my writing is that I'm almost a great songwriter.
Almost.
Yeah, and I think maybe one day I will be, but I like that it sounds like somebody who's almost a great writer.
Do you think you'll ever let yourself admit to yourself that you're a great songwriter? Do you think there's a point where you'll get to where you'll go, no, I made it. I'm a great songwriter now? Because a lot of people will say you're already a great songwriter. Legions of people will already say that.
I guess if I become one, yeah, I guess I'd admit it. But what I like is the sound of somebody trying to be better than they are. So I almost look at that as, that's not a finish line I'm not interested in crossing.
That's just like Camus, right? It's more interesting to be pushing. Was it the Sisyphus?
Where you want to hear, or I want to hear when I listen to somebody that's trying to reach beyond their skill set. That's trying to sing notes they don't have. Dig to a place they can't quite get to. I like the sound of all that.
If you're just tuning in, this is Q. I'm speaking with Chris Carrabba, the lead singer, songwriter for Dashboard Confessional. My name's Tom Power. When people think of, and I'm going to use this word that I'm sure people have either used quietly or loudly or have done what I'm doing is talk around it a million times. But when people talk about the emo music of the early aughts, your band is often talked about. And that's definitely how I first heard about your band. Well, I'm curious how you look back at that. Did you feel in the moment that you were leading some kind of musical movement at the time? Did it feel like you were in the eye of a hurricane?
I felt like I was part of movement.
Yeah.
For certain, for sure. It's interesting. I didn't feel like I was leading a movement because it was such a cooperative. This group of bands that all started around the same time, that all connected with each other, with music that overlapped tangentially. It wasn't really obvious how it was related to each other. Mm-hmm. And we worked very hard together. We booked shows, many of us living in states hundreds of miles from each other, working very hard together to do book tours and
this would be you and who? Like who?
So I could name a few, like the Get Up Kids and Newfound Glory and Saves the Day, and even like the Alkaline Trio.
Yeah, it was definitely a movement.
Yeah. And but it was movement driven by, driven by the sheer will of some foolish kids that thought let's go out and play in anybody's backyard, anybody's basement, if some fool is foolish enough to let us play inside a club, let's play there, And when it began to work, in terms of like the bands getting signed to labels and stuff like that, and if the fan base growing, well, like the Get Up Kids got big, and then they took us out on tour, and Saves the Day got bigger than the Get Up Kids for a minute, so they took us all out on tour, including the Get Up Kids. Then I got a little bigger, and I took all the bands out on tour, and we just kept rotating it, and there was no when you surmised as if I was maybe the leader of this movement. Yeah. I was just really part of it. And yes, at times I was the biggest act, but at times I wasn't the biggest act. Right. But I was part of something special, I think.
What's your relationship with that word? I was kind of dancing around while I was talking to you. What's your relationship with the word emo now?
I've always had a pretty good, no, I haven't always. Let me answer this.
Yeah.
My relationship with emo starts with being a fan of the bands that came before. That group of bands I just mentioned, including my own, Sense Field, Texas is the Reason, Sunny Day Real Estate, Mineral, bands like that where Promise Ring, that we thought of as emo. And then when that term was then up, and it was a neutral term, it was as neutral as saying indie or something like that. When the term was applied to us, we thought it was a misappropriation a little bit, perhaps an error.
How so?
Well, because
you didn't.
We held these bands in such high esteem, then to be included in their ranks,
they must be wrong.
They must be wrong.
Yeah, they must be wrong. I understand.
But it wasn't. There wasn't. we didn't push back against it. It was just we were more confounded. Like, are we lucky enough to be included in that group? And we didn't. I don't think any of us felt like we were in league with our heroes. And then a little while later, the term, I think at first was neutral to affectionate, one or the other. That kind of, I think that was the scale.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think as time went by, a lot of us got popular. And so then some of the arrows came out. And then a lot of us, and then there was these iterations of the next group of bands that would come out, and then the next group. And somewhere along the arc of my career, the bands, the sound of the bands that were now being called emo, to me, didn't relate to me or my peers or the people that inspired us to start bands in the first place that had been called emo.
Right.
So at that point, that was the only time I felt like, I never felt like just because people use emo as a way to make fun of people, or did for a while, maybe they do still.
Yeah.
But it went from this neutral term to affectionate term to this catch-all term. Later, it became kind of like an insult, and I don't take umbrage with that. It's the same thing as like something like hipster.
Yeah.
It's like these people are into artists and things. Okay, that's iteration 1. Iteration 2 is these people dress like the people that are into the artists and things.
Yeah.
And then the next iteration is it's kind of like an insult.
Right.
These are posers or something. But when all is said and done, there was just that brief period where I thought, I've kind of been edged out of whatever this scene means. I still get to do my music, but I'm not. I don't think I'm what people think emo is anymore. And then some time passes, and you realize, well, your fan base calls you what they call you, and they say it with affection. So I don't have a problem with the term.
Speaking of the fan base who calls you what they call you, I'm thinking a little bit about what we started talking about, which was stakes. The way I first heard about your band, I grew up playing banjo and fiddle music and folk music, and it was when I was in high school. Newfoundland had its own kind of version of live journal, something called Blue Cafe, which is this own kind of thing in Newfoundland. But also we had live journal as well. And to be honest, the way I found out about your band was people quoting your lyrics in their darkest, deepest moments. People who were typically 16, 17, 18 years old in their deepest, darkest, saddest moments. Heartbreak and loss, putting your lyrics in there. Does that add any added responsibility to the way you write at all? Do you think about that? Does that weigh on you at all?
No, it doesn't add. It doesn't add any kind of responsibility to the way I write.
Yeah,
but it adds a responsibility to the way I conduct myself.
What do you mean?
Well, I think our scene was one that was built around being the antithesis to big rock and roll. We intended to be accessible. Even if we got big, we intended to it's hard to erase, but diminish the bold line between the act and the fan. And it was evident to me from an early period of my career that people were going to tell me not just that my songs were or my lyrics were meaningful to them, but exactly why, with sometimes very revealing detail about their own lives. And I realized that, I had a responsibility to listen.
Yeah. That's a heavy responsibility, if you don't mind me saying.
Well, it's as heavy as you let it be, I suppose. I can't carry it all with me, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's certainly too heavy.
Yeah.
But I can listen and share back with them why the song meant something to me, and let them know that I appreciate that we're connected through this.
So is it more meaningful now when you play a gig now, all these years later, when you look at those people, is it more meaningful knowing that they have sort of grown up with you?
Well, it is meaningful. I don't know what's more meaningful, but it's meaningful. It's an incredible stroke of luck that we've grown in taste together
Yeah.
and in life experience together. That's the thing with music is, if you're not one of these really just incredible songwriters,
Like who are you talking about when you talk about the great songwriters? This is the second time you brought it up.
well, like in the modern era, I would say, if I pick one out of a hat, like the Killers.
Right.
They write these albums that are epically important and grand, and so well crafted. Excuse me.
Really brilliant, yeah.
And or if I pick from a different era, like Bruce Springsteen, it's just overflowing.
Mm.
That gift is just kind of overflowing. But if you're, I've always thought of it like closer to like of us as closer to like a blue collar version of a songwriter, and that isn't to say obviously the Bruce Springsteen is the speaking to the he's the man of the people.
I know
and
what
all
you
that,
mean.
but I think what I mean is we're I don't think we're elite or anything like that at what we do. We're really good,
Mhm.
and we really believe in what we're doing. But where we've really gotten lucky is that all I can do is follow the song where it goes, and it's defined by where my taste and my life experience is at any one given time.
Mhm.
And where I've been, where I am the luckiest is it's kind of paralleled my fans' tastes and life experience.
Mhm.
So we've grown together.
Yeah, it feels like a collective. It feels less like they're coming out to see you, but you're all sort of reuniting.
I'm going there to see them too.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you.
Thanks, Thomas. It has been great.
I like talking to you.
I like talking to you too. Let's do this again.